Hi, my name is Ryan Zedike. I'm an instructional coach at Douglas ESD, and today's webinar is going to be about Hyperdocs. I'm going to present it in three parts. Part one is going to be what is a Hyperdoc, why you should use it, and where can you find it. Part two will be a podcast from a couple teachers with some ideas and tips on how to use Hyperdocs effectively. And part three will be a video of a teacher using it in her classroom with real students. So let's move on to part one, is what is a Hyperdoc, why is it useful, and where can you find it? In order to show you that, I'm going to share my screen and go through a couple examples of what a Hyperdoc is. So a Hyperdoc uses Google Docs. If you're already using that in your classroom, you'll be familiar with Google Docs. And you assign a Google Doc through Google Classroom to your students. But a Hyperdoc is a way of creating your entire lesson onto the Google document that you're sharing with your students, so that they have a framework that they can see comprehensively and also work through at their own pace. So it's easier to show you some examples. So let's get into those. You may be familiar with the term web quest. They've been around for about 20 years or so, which is a website that a teacher has made. You give your website to the students, and then from that website, they go on a quest to all these other websites out there. So they may be gathering information from Wikipedia. They may be watching videos on YouTube. They may be listening to a podcast somewhere. They're going on a web quest and collecting content. So that's kind of the old version of this. And then the new version, the Hyperdoc, is kind of a web quest, but there's a lot more processing built in for the students. So it's not just content being delivered, it's also students reflecting on their learning and having discussions about their learning built into that same website, which in this case, we're just using a Google Doc. So the first example that I have, you can see on my screen here, is quadrilaterals. This is more of an example of like an old web quest. So we're going to compare the two. It says it's a review game board. So I can imagine students doing this as a review after they've learned about quadrilaterals. All it is a Google Doc with some boxes here and links dropped on them. They're called hyperlinks when you link to another website. So that's where the term Hyperdoc comes from. But you can see in this lesson, over here it says watch, and it takes you to a song about quadrilaterals. Over here, why takes you, when students click on it, it takes them to a Wikipedia article. Over here where it says play, they click on it and it takes them to a math game where they're playing. Down here is a YouTube video that it takes them to. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about with a web quest. It sends them to all these different websites where they're either reviewing or learning information. And where it becomes a Hyperdoc then is where students are responding within the document. So I'm going to show you a few examples of that here. Here's one made in Google Slides. It's just an introduction to multiplication. And this teacher uses the explore, explain, apply model for her lesson. So the first couple boxes, slides that the students work through, explore, so they're watching some brain pop videos here. Some more exploration in YouTube where they're learning the basics of multiplication. And the next slide is explain, so they're typing their answer, explain what multiplication is right here in this box, or draw, use shapes or words to show an example of a multiplication problem. So here's where this activity becomes different from a web quest, is that they're typing directly into the assignment. You can even move on here to the apply section, where now they're answering questions built into the same assignment. You have these apply boxes. Writing multiplication problems and investigating arrays. So you can see how this is very student-centered. It's the students are pacing themselves. They have all the information from start of lesson to end of lesson right in front of them. And then this one ends with a game that they can play there. So there's one example of a Hyperdoc lesson delivered in Google Slides. I'll show you an example that I've used at a workshop. This is for the TIES conference, which stands for Therapy in Educational Settings. And I did a session on trauma-informed education, and specifically how to create trauma-informed groups with teachers and admin and just teams of educators. So my Hyperdoc, I gave my participants, my students, one link to get to this Hyperdoc, and then check out how my lesson is, my framework of my lesson is plugged right into this Hyperdoc. So I have an engage section, that's my hook. I have my timing, my pacing guide right there for 12 minutes. But notice right here, even this first activity is it's not a digital activity. As a table group, discuss something going on in your region. So this is a discussion that my students are having as a hook for my lesson with some question prompts right here in front of them. So I don't have to repeat these. I don't have to I don't have to write them on the board. I don't have to give out a worksheet with these on them. And then at the end of the discussion, I had them post something onto this website called Padlet, which is nice because they can click it right from here and have someone in their group post to that website. So the beauty here as a teacher is that I only have to give my students one link to get to this document. And if I use Google Classroom, I don't even have to give them that link. I just assign this document to everybody. Everybody gets their own copy. And then what I do is, look right here, all the boxes in yellow are places where students can type their own notes from this discussion. So you can imagine my students sitting at a table in groups of 3, groups of 4. They all have their Chromebooks open to this document, this Hyperdoc. But then we're all as a class working through this lesson together. So there's that first as a table group engage section. As I go down here, here's explain. This is where they're going to explain some of their learning. So it has a little read section here where I link them to a website where they're going to read something, watch a video, and then answer some questions inside of that video. Notice they're doing that independently. And there's also, again, the box for them to take notes. You move on to the explore section. So this is all paced out for them. As a teacher, as a facilitator, I'm keeping the timer on the board so they know how long they have to move through this section. And they also have all of the directions right there in front of them. The explore section is with a partner, so now they're going to be working with a partner and investigating some resources that I have linked from the internet. They're exploring those and then also discuss what is useful. Again, the note-taking box. Here's a reflect section. So we're about 30 minutes into the lesson. Now we're going to reflect on some of our learning. And then at the end of the lesson, there's a close, which has nothing to do with digital tools. It's just a closing activity of them putting their thinking down on paper and then sharing some of their ideas together with a partner and a different partner. Again, instructions are right there in front of them. So there's another example of how you can use a Hyperdoc, and I also have one more from another teacher. I like to grab examples from all over the place so that you can imagine how they can be used in your content area. So here's here's a PE lesson, a health lesson on ankle sprains. So I hope you can imagine that if you can bring in Hyperdocs technology to PE, then it doesn't really matter what content area you are. they're going to be useful there. This lesson framework is built on the 5E model, which is engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. That's the framework, the lesson plan framework that the students will move through. So, and then it's the same idea. They're going to engage, that's their hook. This teacher also used a Padlet to have them post their ideas. They're going to explore. That's where they're exploring the content on their own. This is a nice spot in your lesson to put in like a menu. Explore this, or here's an article, or here's a video. And the students get to choose how they want to explore with the content. Next, they're going to explain in their own words and instructions for how to do that. They're going to elaborate, so this means they're going to take whatever they learned and put it into something tangible. They're going to create something out of it, elaborate deeper on the concept. So the teacher here has them creating their own video using iPads or Chromebooks, and then evaluate. They're going to reflect on their own thinking at the end, and that's how this lesson plan is set up. Okay, so there we've seen 3 or 4 different examples of models of Hyperdocs. I want to show you how you can find these, because beautiful thing about these, well, I like how they're laid out, but beautiful thing is that they're free also. So all I need to do is show you how to get to the templates for these, and then you can start plugging in your own lesson. So if you go to Google, I'm going to zoom in here, and all you have to do is, I guess you can't even see that. Oh, well. I'm going to search for Hyperdocs. And on mine, the first site that comes up is hyperdocs.co. It might be the first one that comes up on yours, it might not. But that's what you're looking for, hyperdocs.co. And I'm going to go there and go to this resources section right here on their website. Resources, templates. You'll also notice there's samples there where you can get ideas for how to do some of these in different content areas. But right now I'm just going to focus on templates. So they provide us with 4 or 5 different templates pre-made with all these nice colorful boxes and everything to just plug in your lesson plan too. So the first one is a basic Hyperdoc lesson template. There. Here is the Explore, Explain, Apply model. Here is the 5E model we just saw. And here's a workshop model. And lastly, here's like a superhero topic X model. So check this out. Let's say I want the Explore, Explain, Apply. Click on that. And load up the Hyperdoc template for me. As long as I'm signed into my Google account, I can hit File, Make a Copy. And now I have my own copy that I can type into. So I already have the format here. Explore, Explain, Apply. It even tells me what to put in here. Explore, it says insert links, images, videos, or articles which allow students to independently build background knowledge for a topic. And all I have to do is paste my stuff right in there and give my students their task over here on the side. Explain, their task. Apply, give them their task. And it's that easy. Template, it's free. Template's already set up. Plug my stuff in there, assign it on Google Classroom, and boom, your students are off, working independently, but also in groups and partners, and it's easy to call them back for whole group, and they have their pacing set there for their timer, they have their directions right in front of them, they can click off to other websites if they need to. Really a beautiful way to deliver lessons in your classroom. So that was part 1 of this 3-part podcast, a webinar. Part 2 is going to be a podcast of other teachers giving tips on how to use these. And then part 3 will be a video of a teacher using these in her classroom. So let's move on to part 2, which is a podcast that I found with some tips about using these. And while that's going on, I'm just going to pause my video. So there is no video for this. It's just audio. So you can get up and roam around if you need. and I'll click back over in 10 minutes when it's done.
Hyperdocs, How-To and Success Tips for Teachers, Episode 187. The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today. Today we have Lisa Scupiero, who is a 10th grade English teacher from Maryland, and we're talking Hyperdocs. Lisa, what are Hyperdocs?
Hyperdocs are either normally a doc or slide that you build for the students. They give an ability for the students to work collaboratively. They can then work through the topic or problem at their own pace, and you can give them choices within it so that they can evolve around that central question or concept or problem.
Okay, so how is this different from a normal just doc? Is it that you're giving them an assignment, you're giving them an activity, are they making templates from it so they each have their own personal copy? What's it like?
Well, usually what they do is when somebody builds one, you have the introduction for the students. It gives them some background information. When I used to teach it, I used to almost do the same thing I do in a Hyperdoc in a lesson. I would give them some background information. Sometimes in the Hyperdoc, then you can do like a flipped classroom type of thing where they can access the Hyperdoc. They watch something prior to coming to class, and then they can do something with it. They can reflect on it. They can prepare some questions for the actual class. And then when the teacher has them go through the Hyperdoc, they're basically walking them through the learning process. For my type of teaching now, I don't do a lot of stage on the stage talking the entire time. I walk around and I make sure that they're not confused, they don't have questions. I'm more of a facilitator, making sure that they understand what's going on, and that Hyperdoc helps them through it because it goes from where they're beginning to just be introduced into the topic, they delve into the topic, and we even have things at the end of Hyperdocs usually that are extensions.
So I use a learning management system, and I'll have these long pages, and I have to. So is it almost like somebody's using Google Classroom, and the doc is like a page or a web page you would have in your, or are kids actually editing and writing on the page?
They can edit and write on it. What I do is in Google Classroom, I will give them the Hyperdoc, and then I will make it a copy for each student. And then they're able to access the material that I want them to, maybe let's say on the left, and then on the right, they have an opportunity to either take notes or reflect. Or with the Hyperdoc, what's nice is you have all things hyperlinked for the students. So they're only going to one doc, but everything is hyperlinked. The videos, the other activities they have to do, the choices that they have, whether they do or they go to a Go formative, everything is in one so that they see the process and where it's leading to, and they see the end before they get to it, so that they feel a little bit more confident about what they're doing.
So can you give me an example of a recent Hyperdoc lesson?
Yeah, so today 10th graders, and they had a narrative that they're writing, and I made a Hyperdoc for them to make it easier for them. I told them that we were going to madman write, which is just writing really quickly something down for 15 minutes and seeing if that's going to be your narrative. And I had the link for them to know what a madman writing. And then I had what dialogue looked like. I also had the rubric that I was going to use. But I showed them today and tomorrow they're writing. But then on Monday, they're going to peer edit. And I showed them the entire thing and told them, if you want to go in and see what the peer editing looks like so that you know where you're going to go with your writing, nothing is a mystery. Everything is there for you to look at and see where you want to go with this.
Totally agree with this. One click, everything should be right there. Kids should never have to hunt for it. They shouldn't have to navigate for it. It should just all be right there. Now, you're excited about how Hyperdocs and this interactivity is being built into other tools. Give me some examples.
I use it in Docs and Slides, but I also use it in Google Sites. I've done it for a digital breakout with kids. I had them read a story that was a mystery, and then they had to like crack codes and figure out everything, and it was fun. And I'm building one right now on a Google site for students where they're going to have, each page is going to be something that they can go to if they choose. There's going to be choices. So if they choose to go to the next part of the adventure, then they'll go to that page. And so it will sort of build out on that Google site. Also, Flipgrid, it is evolving so that teachers, when they create their grid, they can embed docs in there. I've embedded entire Hyperdocs in there so the kids can access the Hyperdoc as they're on Flipgrid. You can embed video. You can also embed images or even like a prompt in there so kids are being steered in the right direction. So you just don't have to have everything on your board. I used to have kids like take a picture with their phone or their iPad on the board of what they were supposed to do for Flipgrid that night, and they'd have to access that at home. Now when they go home to do their Flipgrid, they have all of the directions right there.
So, Lisa, is there a mistake that many educators make when they start using Hyperdocs?
When I started making Hyperdocs, my mistake was I tried to do it from scratch. I didn't really look at any. I looked at some and said, okay, I think I get the basic premise. Let me start from scratch. And when I made my first one, it was for Great Gatsby. And I did it with my students, and it was like maybe 2.5 years ago. And I remember looking at me like, wow, this is a lot to do. We did it for 2 days. They were very with it. But then they also said, this was a lot for us to do. And they gave me some suggestions. And then what I did the next time is I started looking at some. Lisa Highfield, she has a wonderful Hyperdocs site. I also use my Google Keep, and anything that is shared out on Twitter with Hyperdocs, there's Padlets and all kinds of stuff. I put it in my Keep, and then I look through them, and I'll sometimes make a copy of them, strip them from what they have, and then work from, because I like the layout, or I like how it looks.
So you've given us the suggestion to look at other examples. What is the most wildly helpful suggestion you have for teachers who want to use Hyperdocs?
I would say make sure when you use Hyperdocs that you are okay with failing forward, because the kids might need a little bit of help. This year, what I did prior to even doing a Hyperdoc with them is we did a Hyperdoc together. I said, what do you think this thing that's underlined in blue is? They're like, a link. Some classes, it was dead air. Like, this is a link. And we actually did a Hyperdoc together, and that gave the students the comfort level that they needed. So I would say make sure that the kids are comfortable. Don't expect it to be perfect the first couple times, because they're getting accustomed to it. But eventually, they'll appreciate the extra effort that you're making.
Last question, Lisa. Some people have to go to their administrators or curriculum directors and convince them that it is worth trying something new. What is the elevator pitch for why educators Hyperdocs?
Well, I think educators need to use Hyperdocs because the whole thing in our building is the UBD, like design plan, designing with something with the end in mind. I've even Hyperdoc'd all of my units. I make sure that I know where I'm going with everything. I Hyperdoc all the ancillary materials I'm going to use during that unit. And it just helps me see the end in mind, plan for a purpose, and be able to see where I'm going with the students.
All educators, we have something new to try for this EdTech Tool Tuesday, Hyperdocs. Check the show notes and take a look and tweet out your Hyperdocs so that we can all share.
All right, hope you enjoyed that and picked up a couple tips for using these. The third part of the webinar is going to be a video of a teacher using a Hyperdoc in her classroom with real students. It's about a 13-minute video. The first 3 minutes explain the Hyperdoc and the lesson, so you have some context. and then the last 10 minutes show the lesson in the classroom. So I'm gonna have to stop sharing real quick and get that video going for you.
Hyperdocs are transformative, interactive, digital lessons, the ultimate change agent in the blended learning classroom, having the potential to elevate the way you teach and the way your students learn. We're going to walk through a lesson about commas. This third grade blended learning lesson is packaged on a Google Doc with all the needed resources placed for a deliberate cycle of learning. Students will explore a concept first, then comes the explanation, then the application of knowledge. Let's take a closer look at the lesson design. This Hyperdoc starts with an engage and explore activity of songs and videos, allowing students to explore comma rules before hearing the explanation from the teacher. Students are asked to explore the resource, then record their learnings and what they wonder about commas. After they have actively engaged with the learning and making meaning for themselves, the next step is the explain portion of the lesson design. Students will have access to the comma rules, which cover the content goals for the lesson, plus moving beyond, including rules that extend past third grade standards. Having this document linked for easy access allows all types of learners to receive the level of support they need to succeed with a lesson or go beyond. The apply part of the lesson design asks students to examine text from their current class read aloud. They are to look for commas, highlight them, then check the 8 rules to find out which ones apply, and copy and paste the rules in the chart. As the designer of this Hyperdoc lesson, Kathleen included specific learning goals to meet the diverse needs of her students. Let's watch as she begins this blended learning lesson at the carpet, Reader's Workshop style.
You'll go off for just a short period of time. We'll probably pick this back up in the Chrome Lab this afternoon, but short period of time working with a partner on a doc. Okay, so it'll be no technology, on technology, and stuff. Okay, so eat, shoots, and leaves.
In this portion of the lesson, Kathleen is using the inquiry method to let children explore the concept of commas without telling them the rules.
Doctors. Do you see the change in the picture? Does the picture kind of help you with that?
She gives students time to collaborate, share their thinking face to face.
What did you notice change between one page and the other?
So like too many commas, and then the second
She shares one more example, emphasizing what did you notice rather than telling them the rule.
What did you notice, Deshaun? Wait, let's let Deshaun.
Second page where there is a comma, when Becky teased, it's like the same words except when they added the comma after Becky teased the boy, it's telling what she used to tease the boy.
Absolutely.
Lynn has started her comma lesson offline with engaging and exploring the concept of commas. She hasn't explained any rules yet.
What we love to do as learners is we like to start through little videos, really short videos. So what I did when I was trying to decide how best to teach you is to pull these videos. And if you were in the Chrome Lab or the computer lab, I'd probably just have you guys do it on your own, right? And then we'd stop, we'd reflect, we'd talk about our learnings. But because we're doing it together, I'm going to show it, we're going to stop, I'm going to jot, I'm going to be the jotter, right? And then we'll keep going.
Her third graders are learning how to pull information from videos and text, so she chose to model the explain portion of the lesson together.
Number 13 on our list is missing comma in a compound sentence.
Her goal is to explicitly teach how to listen for information and pay attention to wonders and questions they have. This is a skill they'll practice together before she releases them to do it again with their partners. She'll practice this over and over again.
And you just heard her say or learned or wonder. Nate, what did you? Okay, you use commas a lot. Can you give me an example?
A Eventually, her students will do this part on their own. But she starts by modeling the expectations with the whole class. She asks for their thinking and types it on the Hyperdoc that they will be using.
Sentence. So here it tells you a compound sentence. Compound sentence is what Nate talked about.
This chart of comma rules is the resource students will be using for the explained portion of the lesson. Students will match up what they notice in the reading with the rules. This chart is linked up on the Hyperdoc for easy access. She teaches the class how to leave it open, then refer back to it when needed.
Comma rule, and copy and paste the rule. Okay, here I go. Is this the rule? Yes. A compound.
She models the tech skills as she goes, rather than teaching them separately, and never assuming that they know how to highlight or copy and paste.
I can't see it up there, but I can see when I do it. Okay, I'm going to copy it. I'm going back after my example, and I'm pasting. A compound sentence contains, all right, and just so that you guys can see it standing out, and if you want to do it, you can do it. There we go. Let me see. The shapes arrange themselves into words. Is that a sentence? Yes. Okay, let me check the second one.
At this point, she's ready to release students to work in groups, giving them the last of the instructions.
Then we'll work on it. Yeah, I don't want the whole class on the same doc. It won't work. But the three of you can be on the same doc, okay? How do you copy it? Let's go up here. You can copy. Rename.
There are many ways to get Hyperdocs to students. This is a choice you need to think about when teaching with Hyperdocs. Kathleen wanted to type on their copy first, but could have used Google Classroom to give each student their own copy. She wants to build their doc skills, though, and wanted to keep a copy for each group of 3, so she chose this method instead. As students begin working in their groups of 3, we get a glimpse of their collaborative thinking through exploration on their Hyperdoc.
Mine is a Lamborghini. Love is ridiculous, but love is also wonderful and powerful and desperate. I made mine a Lamborghini for the princess. I know that. Yeah. I want to do different. Do you want to bold it maybe? Yeah, I think we should be. Yeah. So good. Let's look for more commas. No, we need to highlight it. That's a comma. That's a comma. Let's first read it. Do we have to do all the commas? I think so. Yep. Over there. And now the word is dark and light is precious. But there's so many. Come closer, dear reader. You must trust me. This was last time. Oh, this is you already like a full sentence. Yeah. This is done. Subject and a verb. Oh wait. And things that it does have that. Maybe you should just have.
So you're on
Yeah,
there, and I go to highlight.
I just add like whatever. Okay, so I'm gonna have to highlight this. And I don't want to highlight that. Okay.
Okay, 2 minutes.
So you need to write the word. Oh shit. Okay. So why are we hiding like that? I forgot. Oh, I'm not highlighting that. So why are we hiding like that? I forgot. There's 2 in one. So let's go over here. Oh, wrong one. Yeah, that is the one he sees. Oh, that's the other one. Yeah.
This is the apply portion of the lesson. Students are able to work together to show what they know about the comma rules for the examples on the Hyperdoc. All the tools they need to complete this lesson are packaged on the Hyperdoc to help the learning process go smoothly.
There we go.
By allowing her students to explore the content and apply their learning without the lecture, Kathleen is freed from the front of the classroom to work with small groups. She can pull her students who are learning English, nudge her students who are easily getting the concept, and support those who need extra help.
Okay. That is the best learning right there, right, Alex? When you bring it to attention to your group saying, I'm not sure about this, because remember, when we're done with this piece, I might give you another 10 minutes together in the Chrome Lab, but you're on your own. So please, when you have a question, speak up to your group because that's where the learning happens, okay?
Kathleen uses
All
this
right,
mid-workshop
third person,
interruption to
computer,
emphasize and
3
reteach good
minutes,
collaboration
go.
within the groups, encouraging higher levels of critical thinking and metacognition. The routines in this classroom enable this lesson to go smoothly. From the switching of partners to the cleanup process, everyone knows their role before coming back to the carpet for the final reflection, a crucial piece to this Hyperdoc that could be done online or offline.
What did you like about this activity? Roma, what did you like about it?
Students were asked to reflect on what they liked, what they learned, and what challenged their learning. This metacognition practice will help them build the skills that they'll use when learning with Hyperdocs more independently in the coming days.
Is that what you're saying? Okay. What did you like about the Zudita?
So the hard part about it was knowing what kind of comma
This time gives Kathleen the
So what did you
opportunity
do when it
to
was hard?
realign their understanding, formatively assess the many skills they practice, and it also provides immediate feedback highlighting their successes.
the comma and I read all of those and I thought which ones seemed similar.
Yeah. So you used the comma rule as your reference as you kind of went back and forth. Did you toggle back and forth and back and forth? It takes a lot, doesn't it? Yes. Okay, last one. Deshaun?
When I made a mistake, my group helped me, so I also had a big learning because I really didn't know. I didn't know that there are different ways you can use a comma.
So I think I heard what you say was that you liked working with your group because when there was something that you thought it was and someone was there to say, I'm not to question it in a respectful way, and you're like, oh, now I get it, right? Because I think as third graders, we know a few different comma things, don't we?
Yeah.
But I gave you 8 different comma things.
Since this was the first day students were experiencing this Hyperdoc, Kathleen chose to do the reflection offline. She went back to the doc later, and students were allowed to do it online. This allowed every student a voice. This lesson was 1 hour, but did continue on for part 2 and 3 over the next few days. For part 2, students were challenged with finding more commas while reading their library books. They took pictures of the sentences and used the app Sketch to annotate the punctuation. They next then uploaded the images to a shared doc with a chart that required them to sort their comma pictures under the correct comma rule. This proved to be the messiest learning and the most valuable. Since it was a shared Google Doc, Kathleen was able to pull the class together to debate the placement of the images, adjust misplaced ones, and extend the depth of knowledge by inspiring kids to wonder why some columns were empty while others were full. This led to students questioning if there is a difference between nonfiction text and fiction when it comes to comma usage. Going through these experiences created a very successful sticky learning experience, one that kids remembered long after the lesson, as Kathleen saw the transfer to the correct usage of commas in their writing pieces. And finally, part 3 of the Hyperdoc. Students were able to apply their knowledge of commas by using Storyboard That to create their own version of the book, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, that inspired the entire lesson. You can find more information about Hyperdoc lessons at hyperdocs.co or find the book on Amazon. Also be sure to search through the huge database of Hyperdoc lessons created and shared by teachers from all over the globe at teachersgiveteachers.net and on the Hyperdocs Facebook group or on Twitter at tsgivets.
All right, hope you enjoyed that. There was one thing that I noticed that stood out from both the podcast and the video. Both of the teachers sat down with their students and modeled using the Hyperdoc the first time with their students. One was a 10th grade teacher, I think, and the other one was a 3rd grade teacher, but that didn't change. Both of them went through the expectations for working through the Hyperdoc, but also modeled for them how to click on a link, how to type in this box, And then the third grade teacher did some modeling also of cutting and pasting and highlighting text. So that's, I think, an important tip to walk away with. So I'm going to share my screen one more time just so that you have my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. At the Douglas ESD, my name is Ryan Zedike, and here is my email address down here at the bottom. Send me an email if you need anything relating to Hyperdocs or anything else, I guess. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.